Almost 50 years ago, a group of friends met at a diner and began to organize a movement. They formed a group dedicated to preserving the pristine waters and forests of northeastern Minnesota. Through grassroots organizing, they helped pass the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Act, which protected the boundary waters for future generations. Today, that organization, Friends of the Boundary Waters, continues its work to protect, preserve, and restore this cherished wilderness. Whether it's through fighting toxic mining proposals at the edge of the boundary waters, or introducing the next generation to the wonders of the BWCA, our strength is in our members. It is in you. To learn more and find out how you can join this community today, please visit friends-bwca.org.
Welcome to the Paddle and Portage podcast. In case you're new to this podcast, I'm sitting here with Joe Fredericks.
And Baxley with Farm to Feet, socks adorned. I see your socks, and I see no shoes.
Well, it's the time of year where we wear big, heavy boots and take them off when we come into the office. At least those with who weren't born in a barn. I see your shoes are still on.
Clomping around, dragging in snow and filth.
Did you call me filth?
I might even have on the bottom of these shoes some gravel and some snow from St. Paul, Minnesota.
You've been on the road, and we've done updates from the road, and we also bring you our sort of normal stories from the wilderness, and today is a little bit of both.
Some crossover, some hybrid discussion happening today for sure on the podcast.
So, Joe, help us understand some context for the story today. You hit the road down to the Twin Cities. Typically, you're buzzing all over stories that you're working on, interviews, media appearances. How'd this all start?
Well, this one started actually with an email or text. Take that back. Text that I got from a longtime listener of the podcast, a gentleman named Scottie Baldwin.
Scottie Baldwin, he's sent you through the ringer a few times.
Indeed. So, and we've known him for years at this point now and met him in person many times. He's in the music industry and has worked with some very high-profile artists over the years. He's shared some of those stories on WTIP, the radio station Grand Marais, where we started the original version of the podcast back in many, many years ago now. So that's how we first met Scottie, was like through music and the Boundary Waters.
Great guy, hilarious, creative, awesome dad. I got to meet Scottie's kids. They're great. And it's good to know that he's staying in the loop with us.
Yeah, and I hear from him. And he's now working part of the year overseas, like in China, and working with major artists over there, musicians and so forth. There's a sound engineer. And Scottie often will, or periodically will reach out and say, this last episode really hit home, just made me miss the woods, the boundary waters, and staying connected thanks to the podcast. Appreciate you, that type of sentiment.
Yeah, it's like most of us, Scottie has his work life, and that is very different from his recreational life. And in the context of Scottie loves the wilderness, loves it deeply, passionately. It is an important place to him. And therefore, the podcast is too.
Exactly. And this message that I got from Scottie, just last week of January, I was in International Falls at the time. This message comes in and Scottie says, "Hey, yesterday was permit day," that being January 29th. "I wanted you to know that based on an episode you recently did on the Paddle and Portage podcast about permits, and we talked with John from North Country Outfitters about maybe adjusting the rollout to go live day or opening day, the rollout of the Boundary Waters permits during the quota season. We did an episode in mid-January about some possible other options in that capacity.
Yeah, it was a great episode that outlined the pitfalls of the current system, challenges that it creates, and some very articulate alternatives that already exist within the system of permitting that could be applied to the boundary waters. If you haven't listened to it, I recommend actually going back and listening to that before this episode. It's quite good, and it will help you understand Scottie's experience.
Mm-hmm. So he continues to say, after listening to that episode, I took stock, I looked in the mirror, and I said, you know what? The people they're talking about who book a lot of permits and then cancel them, and that's a reason that the go live day has become problematic. It's not just the frenzy. That's not actually the issue. The issue is people gobble up all the permits and then don't use them. Either they cancel them or they just get wasted, nobody shows up type thing. So Scottie said, I last year, 2024, booked 10 permits, like 10 permits, some fairly significant number on opening day, like rapid fire, permit here, permit here, permit here, and then figured out later what he was going to use. And he only ended up using one of those permits.
Canceled the rest.
Yeah. So he said, Joe, I realize I'm the problem. And he wanted to say thanks for doing that episode. It shifted his mindset, put it in the context of like, whoa, I'm the issue here, and I'm the symbol, I'm a representative of this problem. And I, of course, said, I'm going to be in the cities. Want to talk about this? Get it on the podcast?
Yes.
And Scottie agreed to do that, and I had a chance to sit down with him in St. Paul. I was down there for Omaha Air Dickus's kids curling tournament, Justin and his team, and we were able to connect, Scottie and I, on a snowy Saturday afternoon in St. Paul, Minnesota, to talk about the permits and his experience. Take it from there, if you would, Scottie.
Well, clearly there's something, I don't want to say the system is broken, but there's something that needs to be tweaked. And generally, if everything is overhauled, then you're going to create more issues. And I think when you had an outfitter on, and that outfitter was really adroitly pointed out that all it needs is a tweak of a rolling permit system, or I'm not sure how he described it.
Yeah, John Scheffelbaum over at North Country Outfitters in Ely.
He was a great guest, and he talked about possibly, for example, on January 1st, you would open up for May 1st permits. And January 2nd, you'd be able to buy for May 1st or 2nd, January 3rd, May 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. And what that would do is that would spread out, just that one little tweak, a little change like that could actually make a huge difference. And you wouldn't have to overhaul everything. You just have that available for that day and before. And what that would do is it would keep outfitters from having to have their nephews, nieces, cousins, everyone coming to the outfitter that day, opening all these laptops, trying to grab all these permits that their clients have had, which happens. It would keep friends from trying to all grab permits, and we would all get less handsy, and they would only become available. And that small change, I think, would satisfy everyone.
And so you proactively changed your approach this year after hearing that episode of the podcast that we did.
That immediately made me say, let me just take a step back before permit day, and that my fingers were doing all the workouts ready at 9 a.m. to like log in and just grab, and grab and hoard. It's like being in one of those machines with the dollar bills flying around, and you're just grabbing every dollar bill you can in 30 seconds.
Because that's what you did like in 2024, right?
Yeah.
All the time, yeah.
I mean, every year it's like grabbing 5, 7, 8, 10 permits, and then checking with trip partners and saying, that wasn't available, this is, can you do that? And last year I got 7. I canceled 5 within 12 hours. By 9 p.m. I had canceled 5. That seems strange, but when you think it through, I grabbed a bunch. I went, oh, that's not, I'll grab this one, I'll grab this one. Checked with people, canceled 5. A couple months later, canceled another one that about 2 months out from the date it was. So that was plenty of time for them to, and then used one that the last remaining of the 7 permits. And what that does is, I'm sure it counts to the Forest Service as 5 cancellations. Sure. So I think it may be just a little bit reflexive to say 11,000 permits. weren't used. It's
maybe, but nonetheless, it's a canceled permit. And if everybody's going there on Go Live Day, is sort of the trend that emerged through that hype of the day that the Forest Service itself engaged in, and somebody sees that, let's say, the Round Lake entry points are booked for that day, like anything going into Missing Link, those types of permits, or Pine, where there's like one permit a day, right. And they see on Go Live Day that it's gone at 9:30. If they're not subscribed to like Paddle Planner and Ben's system that's giving you an alert when there's a permit back in the queue, they might not know. So it's just they write it off and they're just dismissive of like, shit, all the Pine permits are booked. We're not getting in this year, even though you released it the same day.
That's totally true. That's exactly right. And that's what I don't know what we're calling it or what he called it, but a kind of a rolling by day release, which seems like it's a streamed release. It's just a little bit are let out at a time. And that seems to be the smallest tweak that would make sense and satisfy most people. Because I certainly wouldn't. And what I did this year, antithetically to last year, was when I heard all the talk going and I was on Reddit and BWCA on Reddit, and I was like, well, here's what the system allows. Here's within the means of within the boundaries of us being able to do it, this is what's allowed. I just decided to go the exact opposite way, and I booked none, and I still have no permits, and I'm just going to wait. And because my schedule is a little more flexible, I decided this year to just get what I could get when I need it and just kind of roll with it. And it's a different thing for me, but I have a schedule that allows that sort of behavior, so I'm going to actually back up a little bit and leave that open to more people to grab stuff.
Yeah, cool. I think it's really refreshing that you decided to tell me about your experience and then also be open to talking about it on the podcast, because in a sense, this sort of idea of there's this problem happening with all these permits get gobbled up and then canceled, released, like it's sort of an abstract thing. And now you're saying like, I, Scottie Baldwin, am the problem. It's a much larger thing, but you are like you times 1,000 or multiple thousands of people, as was the case. Like that's the issue, and you're owning up to it and saying that you pivoted off of that. I think it's cool, Scottie. So thanks for being open to doing that.
Well, hopefully there are like 2 or 3 more Liz or Clearwater, or these ones that just get gobbled. You look and it's zeros all the way up to September 30th already. And hopefully that has opened up for other people that really want to. I try and introduce one person a year to the Boundary Waters. I always bring at least one new person. And I can still do that and accomplish that goal of mine, but have all these other permits available for people right away, which I think is good, because more people need to experience what we know, that secret that we know.
Quick break in the episode. LB, where are you heading in March?
I'm headed lots of places in March, but specifically the weekend of March 7th through the 9th, I'll be with you actually at Canoecopia.
Canoecopia 2025. Get your tickets now. They're available now. And book your lodging accommodations, plan your trip to Madison for Canoecopia 2025. It's coming up, and we'll see you there. Support for this episode of the podcast comes from Borderland Lodge, inviting listeners to unwind, explore, and create lasting memories against the backdrop of the Boundary Waters. They're offering pet-friendly cabins, lakeside lodge rooms, and cozy weekend dining along the shores of Gunflint Lake. You can find more about Borderland at their website, borderlandlodge.com. Also, check out their Instagram page for some of the incredible Italian pasta meals that Steph is making up at Borderland. And Pastas and I were recently up at Borderland, and Steph was showing us some of the recipes and ideas that she has for some of those pasta dishes. Oh my goodness, check it out, Borderland Lodge on Instagram and Facebook, or their website, borderlandlodge.com. Again, I really think it's cool that Scottie was willing to say that about the permits and sort of be the face to the situation that has otherwise just been 10,000 cancellations. Well, who is it that's canceling them? Well, part of it's Scottie Baldwin. When I was driving down to St. Paul to meet with Scottie, another message came in. He says, there's this other individual I was wanting you to meet. Guy's name is Dan Johnson. BWCA Wild. BWCA Wild. Where's that ring a bell?
He's the guy who does the portage videos.
Years ago, when we went ice fishing, 2023 now, so a couple years back, we're going into Sawbill area.
You and I.
few other people. Dan from Sawbill was out on that
yeah,
trip.
I remember.
K-Man was up.
Yeah, early season.
Early ice, walleye, fishing trip. And while we're walking out there, it was either the great Josh Dix or K-Man who said, hey, you ever seen that guy's videos he's walking down the portages, and it's just like, that's what the video is a person holding a GoPro walking down the portages in the Boundary Waters. And I was like, I think maybe I've seen some of it. And they were fascinated by it. And like, who's doing that? Who's the person filming the portages? And there's some paddling aspects of just literally like paddling down a lake, looking at what you would be seeing if you were paddling.
Just all first-person view of being in the wilderness. No commentary, no narration, just pure presence.
Yeah, and you can hear, it's not like it's muted, so you can hear like rocks,
Paddles.
kicking. Yeah, or birds, wind. So you can hear audio, but there's no like, oh, this is a pretty steep one, or gorgeous day, or anything like that,
Yep.
So nobody had ever said, Dan Johnson, BWCA Wild. It's just like BWCA Wild, sort of like how BWCA.com, nobody really says Adam.
Right.
There's like people doing this stuff, So Scottie says, you got to meet BWCA Wild, or maybe he says Dan from BWCA Wild. Whatever the circumstances, while I'm in St. Paul talking with Scottie, Dan comes along too. And we got to talk about, so there's like the news aspect that Scottie and I discussed about the permits and go live day and our podcast episode. Well, I was able to talk with Dan about video and what we've been talking with Brian Hansel about, and our own coverage and reporting about the Explore Act that was recently passed, signed in January by then President Biden, that, among many, many other things, added some clarity to, can you shoot video on national forest land, public land? And you can now, without this sort of gray area, where before, had we had Dan on, that could have been potentially problematic for him.
Let's jump into that conversation.
The website I have, I never created it to like make money, so the idea of worrying about ruffling feathers just didn't ever even cross my mind.
Dan, as I said, we've been following your channel for a while. You live in Minneapolis, right?
Right, downtown.
Yeah, nice. And so when you're up there filming, you've walked a lot of portages. Like, your channel is robust, extensive, the website as well. And it sounds like you put in some pretty marathon epic days in order to do this. Equivalent to like the Barefoot Paddler in terms of like volume and the places you've been. And if you're not in it for the cash, this is a passion project, it sounds like.
Yep, it's just totally a hobby that I just started doing, and I actually didn't ever think it would get this big either. So I think there's roughly 400 campsites out there now that I've videoed easily that number of portages, 300 lakes. So I would say I'm approaching the 1/4 way point of getting the BWCA completely on a virtual platform.
Wow. Is that the objective? Is that something you want to do?
The goal is to get the whole Boundary Waters on the internet, because the Boundary Waters, if you look at it on a map, it actually kind of is a web. The lakes are like the points, and the portages are the things that link them all together. Mm-hmm. And the campsites and interesting places are just like extra little data points. Mm-hmm. So that's how I thought about it. I'm a IT guy at heart, so that's why I started doing it like that. So.
And is this in addition to just your passion for the Boundary Waters and wanting to do it? Like, is there a motivation? Is it educational? Like, what's the purpose of it?
There's a little bit of a motivation to like preserve it in a way, because once you put it out on the internet, it's pretty much in perpetuity. I just like going to the Boundary Waters, and I used to go fish up there all the time. And I basically traded in my fishing pole for a video camera. And that was kind of the difference. Yeah. So. And
you are like driving from the cities. When I'm talking about these marathon days, like, you're literally doing some long days, right? Tell us about some of those.
Yeah. So my typical day, I do almost all these trips as day trips. Later on, I'll probably have to do them more as multi-day trips as I get farther out into the Boundary Waters. Mostly, I'm focusing on the perimeter lakes and the entry points areas. But yeah, I get up at typically like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll get up to the lake maybe about 7:30 in the morning, then I'll paddle until it gets dark, and then I'll drive home, and I'll get home about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. That's a typical day.
And how many portages in general?
I can, and that gives me about 14 hours, so I can probably do 25 to 30 miles. I don't have any gear with me. I mean, my canoe is basically empty other than a day pack, and I fly pretty quick. I mean, I would get farther into the boundary waters, but when I record the portages, for example, I have to go back and forth over it. I can't record the video and carry the canoe at the same time. I've tried a few different methods, and like attaching the camera to the front of the canoe and things like that, but this doesn't work. So it's only to get good video, I have to hold it in my hand and walk across. So.
Okay. What's your setup? That's the GoPro. Yeah, mounted 2 GoPros going.
So yeah, I use 2 GoPros on the portages and the campsites, and the reason I have 2 is because these GoPros, they're pretty reliable, but they're not perfect. And when you go across like a 300 rod portage, and then you come home and look at it the next day and find out the video's messed up, that's a drag. So I went to 2 cameras, and I've never had an issue since. I've had one camera go out, but the other one always works or something, For canoeing across the lake, though, when I'm recording that, I only have 1 camera, so I got to get lucky. And the video is completely virtual. Yeah. It's just like you're there. That's my goal. I do on the website, though, include a bunch of pictures, and that's where I put the narration, text narration. So. Okay, yeah.
So, because you were telling me that you have lapel mics and like microphones and so forth.
Right, but that's only for picking up nature sounds, so not to pick up me. Yeah. So cool. The only part of me you'll hear is the huffing and puffing on the portages and stuff. Yeah. I'm just trying to get a pure nature sound for the boundary waters, just like you're there.
This is what Scott is referring to in this day and age of. Obviously for Baxley and I, having done audio work, and we're often in reels and stuff that we're producing and various things on YouTube. We're often in it. Like, we're kind of like the centerpiece of the experience in a way for people to engage with. And then you got people like Shug, the hammock camper, or Midwest backpacker, other people that far water, like that shoot in the boundary waters. They're talking to you, the listener, and that's not your thing. Like, you're not in this for Dan's glory, it seems like.
Yeah, actually, I saw that everybody else was pretty much doing that, so I just needed a different gig.
That's your whole niche. That's your thing. That's your shtick, is like that I'm this anonymous person.
I don't remember what it's called, but there's actually a name for it on YouTube, doing these kinds of videos, and I think they've actually caught on a little bit. There's some name for it. You can have to Google it.
So mentioned earlier that we've connected with Scottie back in the radio days at WTIP, and Scottie remains with music in particular in close contact with music director Will Moore at the radio station.
Will Moore,
WTIP's Will Moore.
He is a genius in his own right, creatively, intellectually. He's just bright shining light in music.
This is Will Moore,
notorious.
Yeah, exactly. So we're sitting there. I'm in St. Paul in this vacation rental that Omaha Eric Dickus and the curling team have rented, and having this discussion with Scottie and Dan, talking about the boundary waters. All of a sudden, there's a knock at the door. It's the one, the only Will Moore.
What's going on, dude? Surprise, surprise.
We interrupt this podcast for Will Moore. You can keep your shoes on, Will, if you want.
Oh, that's all right. No, it's really bad.
Oh, okay, yeah, cool. Frickin' Will Moore shows up. So, most random cameo that I've ever experienced, probably ever. Making a podcast episode about the boundary waters in St. Paul, and Will Moore shows up.
Hey, Will Moore. Welcome to the program.
So it was just delightful that Will was there, and then I got to talk more about just the boundary waters and their experiences for Scottie and Dan, and jump back into that conversation. Dan, that's you had mentioned something earlier about you traded your fishing rod for a camera, and as you launched into BWCA Wild and the YouTube channel and so forth. But tell us a little more about your background, experiences in the Boundary Waters, how you came to start recreating in this place, and sort of your journey into BWCA Wild.
The first trip I took up there was probably when I was 25, so that's 33 years ago or so. I pretty much have been going to the Boundary Waters. I mean, up until I started this website, I was probably going 3 or 4 times a year. I used to work at American Express, and a group of buddies there actually were really into this Boundary Water stuff too, but we actually decided to start going to Quetico. Mm-hmm. So this group of employees at American Express, we went to Quetico, I think 13 or 14 years in a row.
Nice.
On week-long trips.
Mm-hmm.
So that really got me into it, and I've been sold ever since. So
yeah, cool. And are you doing mostly solo trips nowadays when you're filming and so forth?
Yeah, I pretty much have to do solo trips because my videos just don't have any talking in them, so it just doesn't work out real well.
Right. And is this like the only way you're recreating in the Boundary Waters now is doing the footage and recording, or are you also sort of leaving that behind occasionally and just getting out there for the sake of getting out there?
The only time I leave the video camera behind is when I go with other people. I typically do the fishing then. So, mm-hmm. But I'll still sneak in a few campsites and stuff if they'll let me.
Yeah.
To get those filmed. If I'm going by a campsite, I gotta film it. They're just too hard to get. The campsites are the hardest thing to film for this website, just because you go by them and people are camped at them and you can't go there. So you have to keep going by there over and over on multiple trips to finally get some of the more popular campsites. So
we talked about the educational component, or like somebody can see the portage that they're going to do on their trip so that they can just have a gauge of what they're getting themselves into, just as a means for people to like have a viewing of nature in this sort of tranquil experience virtually. Like, is that also part of the experience, and why it's this sounds of nature is like not just so people can see what the portage looks like, but that they can have that connection with nature?
So I get emails and comments on my YouTube channel for this website. One typical kind of comment thread would be people who have hung up their paddle, 80-year-olds and stuff. They actually watch these videos a lot. There's one guy, he puts it on his 70-inch TV and just lets it play literally all the time. And he doesn't even watch it. He doesn't sit there and watch it. He just listens to it. He likes the sound of the paddle in the water, that kind of thing. Wow. So other people use it just to like relive their past adventures and stuff. Mm-hmm. I was just telling you about the 4-mile portage. One guy was telling me what it was like 40 years ago after he watched this video. It was pretty interesting just to hear from a historical perspective what it was like. So, because they actually took a bus across it. So you can't take a bus across that portage anymore. So
right. In addition to the wilderness,
you can't even walk across it. Yeah. You got to paddle across parts of it.
Yeah,
so.
Right. Okay. Interesting. What's your YouTube channel up to subscribers?
I think it's rated only around 800 or something like that. Mm-hmm. The YouTube channel wasn't set up to actually be there for people to go watch these videos. It was actually supposed to be just a holding place for the videos to go on the website. Mm-hmm. So mostly people find the videos by going through the website because the link is showing on the page. So they'll click it there and then they'll end up on the YouTube site, and that's where they might start watching more videos from that point of view.
Yeah. So Scottie, let's jump back to you and talk a little more about your experiences and connection to the Boundary Waters and the wilderness. And before we do that, just to set a little more context for who you are and how we became acquainted. I said at the radio station, and now that Will's here, the music guy from the radio station. You've got music background, robust connections and experiences in the music world, and would you share some of those with us, whatever you're comfortable sharing in that capacity, and then tell us about how you started going up to the Boundary Waters?
Sure. I've been, as a lifelong Minnesotan and a internationally renowned front of house engineer, so I mix concerts that people go to. I mix for the audience, and when I'm away, I'm always looking for that thread of connection back to this. I'm looking for the gravity of where I grew up and where I belong. And I like the purity of the Boundary Waters, and I like that it hasn't changed in forever, in 10 or 12,000 years. And so that a way for me to keep connected was through the Boundary Waters and just my love of it. And I've always had an interest in going, but it was up until maybe a half dozen years ago that I started to go in. And I saw some video, it might have been of Dan's, and I just went, man, I'm just going to do it and start going. And I did it by myself. I booked trips. I started doing solo trips. I had a friend who took me on initially, I had a friend who took me on my first trip to sort of introduce me. It's good to be introduced by someone. And as I said, I try and do that every year, is introduce someone to the Boundary Waters, no matter who it is, and if they will go again. But just introduce somebody to that area and what it can do for your peace of mind. And then I just started going on my own. And part of that experience was listening to WTIP in the mornings, hearing you, hearing Will, and having you guys as a refrain all the time in my head about the area. And as I be in China, now I subsist mainly on my success in China and the Asian markets. So I'm on the other side of the world all the time. And that part of it, so I'm like a balloon flying around, and where I'm nailed down to is my home with my family and also the Boundary Waters. So your area. So as we correspond, I would say, Joe, you're really important to me. The sound of your voice, the sound of Will's voice, is part of what keeps me connected to this part that we can't use for, or choose not to use for probably 7 months a year, right? It's only available to us sort of 4 or 5 months a year. So this keeps me connected, and it's been an important part of me just being able to be part of the area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And are you doing Gunflint primarily because Grand Marais is a part of that experience? You get over to Ely ever or often?
It is. I've done a few trips off of Ely, but mainly the Gunflint. And going through Grand Marais is important to me. And coming down into the town, there's a sort of, if I'm more versed in literature, I would tell you there's some sort of, I would link it to an author, in that there's a romanticism to coming down into Duluth. There's a romanticism about coming down into Grand Marais and what that feels like when you come over that hill and come down into it. And then you turn and then you go up into the unknown. So there's somewhere in there's probably a romantic prose about what it does to you and when it changes. And when you see that water tower and you get on the Gunflint and you know your cell service, you got to do it by the wood, by the mill, the lumber mill. It's like, get all these texts done by the lumber mill, because then it goes out and you don't get it until you end up at your outfitter, right?
We talk about this vicarious living through the podcast, things like BWCA Wild and Dan's channels and walking down the Portage. People really finding value in that in their lives, and wonder your take on watching someone walk down the Portage, or because we're so close.
I mean, I completely understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the need for it. I understand the sanity that's derived from that. Yet I experience it differently because you and I have made certain life choices that put us in proximity to the Portages. If I'd made different decisions in life, I could be finding myself like Scottie on the other side of the planet, pulling up a YouTube channel, pulling up a podcast episode just to connect to what makes me feel sane and whole and human. Fortunately, I can walk out my door and be there relatively quickly on a portage, on a frozen lake right now in the winter, even the shore of Lake Superior. There's a way that I understand it. It's the space where things feel right, I feel right. That's not the madness of all these human things that we find ourselves in to make money and make art. And yeah, I get it. But I also, and like you, I also get to experience it firsthand. Mm-hmm. And if I wasn't, I'd be watching it on a screen.
Yeah.
And I think where my head goes right now is that we're in a time where the uncertainty of not just the outside world that drives me to want to take comfort in the wilderness is really intense, but also the uncertainty around the wilderness itself feels really intense. There's so much happening through executive orders and and governance just sort of rapidly right now, to the point where it's so hard to keep up and understand what the future is for the wilderness, for the Forest Service who manages that wilderness, for staff, for permitting, for basically as complicated as our relationship is with the Forest Service, they are the gatekeepers of the place that we love more than any other place. And what's happening there is potentially devastating. We don't know yet. And I just want our listeners to know that as hard as it is to want to stay tuned to the uncertainty, it's important right now that we stay tuned to the uncertainty, because this is our place. And Joe and I are doing our best to try to make meaning of what's happening without a lot of resources to do so. And so check out the news updates as they're coming out. We're trying to get that information to you in a way that can make sense to you and make sense to us, so that we continue to have pristine portages to walk down in the future.
That's right. And you can find those updates here on the podcast. We share them, and more frequently, and in a way that you can just read the article at paddleandportage.com. So it's both places, but if you're just listening to this on iTunes or Spotify or whatever, go to paddleandportage.com, and we've got a lot of coverage about what you're just describing about Forest Service, staff impacts to some of the consolidation, potentially USDA and the Forest Service itself. Pretty heavy-duty stuff that we're sharing and getting the information from people who are speaking to us at Paddle and Portage, and really appreciate the channels that we have to share this information. It's a really sensitive time. Basically, a lot of the lines of communication that we've come to know, as we shared in this most recent news update, have been altered in some way. So we're being as understanding as we can about what's happening at the federal government, and as patient, but also trying to keep you informed as well.
So maybe before you tune into that, or while you pay attention to what's happening, make sure to go watch a Boundary Waters Portage. Make sure to remember that even in your mind, you can go there whenever you want. Nobody gets to take away from us what lives inside of us.
And I really appreciate that Dan has been out there doing it, like the Barefoot Paddler. They're dedicated, and they're just doing it. And when you ask them why, they don't really have a solid reason. But a lot of people appreciate the work that they're doing to share that visual. People like Scottie Baldwin, when they're in China, can watch it. So thanks to Dan, BWCA Wild. Check it out, bwcawild.com, BWCA Wild on YouTube. Thanks to Scottie Baldwin for setting all this up and making it happen. And
Thanks to Will Moore for the cameo.
Thanks to Will Moore.
We love you, Will. Always will.
I just sing when I paddle canoe, feeling, not thinking if the strokes are true. We're gonna get through to the other side. Out in the night, the waves beat the shore. You can hear them pounding, you can hear them roar. Oh, roll me, rock me in my dreams. You can roll me, rock me in my dreams. So I like to sing, I love to dance. I play the fool if I got the chance. All around the campfire light, all around campfire light, all round, all round, all round the campfire light.